Okay, in this short demonstration, we're going to be looking at the concept of line weight. We're going to be using something called black Conti crayon, which are these long sticks. They're crude instruments, so you're not going to get super fine points unless you're using razor blades and sharpening it, which we're really not doing. It's going to be a little bit messy. That's okay. I don't want you to get too precious with your drawings. And so to begin with, what you're going to do is probably break it into a couple of small pieces because when you put pressure on it, it does crumble and does break quite easily. So line weight refers to the thickness and darkness of a line. And if you have a consistent line weight, what I mean by that is nothing really changes in terms of the darkness or the lightness. So that's consistent line weight. I can press harder. These are consistent line weights. Within the line itself, everything kind of stays the same, which is okay if that's what you're trying to do. And generally what that does is it flattens out an image, gives it a sort of a graphic quality, and a little bit more of a flatter 2D effect. If we want to create more interest with our line, if we want to create more feeling with the line, and in some cases what we're going to be doing with this assignment is creating the sense of space with the line, we want to learn to vary the line weight. And you can do that by changing the pressure. So if you go from very thin, dark, very thin, dark, you get these lines that have all these interesting qualities about them. All right, it's like a ribbon, very calligraphic. There's a lot more happening to the line. These become very static, very stable, and this becomes much more dynamic and lots of movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to experiment with this. We're going to use this technique to create a couple of things. One, visual interest, something that's moving and much more interesting. But two, we're also going to create space. So for example, let's say you had a really boring generic leaf, and I'll talk about the shape of organic forms in a minute. And you had a whole bunch of them kind of coming out from each other. All right, and we can have all our various stems coming down here. Let's say these were your leaves that you're drawing. If you just have consistent line weight like this, they look pretty flat. This looks like it's actually coming out of this piece. This is coming out of this piece. We're not really getting a sense of overlap. So what we do is where they overlap, we add more pressure, and it creates a little bit of darkness and thickness to the line. So if I come here and I just put a little bit more darkness in there and then fade it out, and I want to fade it out on this side too, and then do the same coming into that intersection, I get a much more interesting effect. The eye is drawn to that. If I continue that over here, you can see that the eye is drawn to these sections. So that sense of overlap is exaggerated slightly, and it makes a much more interesting drawing. Compare what's happening up here to what's happening down here. We can also use this technique to emphasize things. So let's say I really wanted to call attention to the tip of this leaf. I just put a little bit more darkness in there. Different kinds of effects. So if I had something that came out like this, and I wanted to really kind of bring your attention to this here, I could just, where they overlap, do a little bit more of the darkness happening there, and where they come off the end here, do the exact same thing. All right, so we get a much more interesting effect there. So what you're going to be doing is drawing it more like this, and then you're going to go back in and you're going to do this. All right. As you develop a much more of a natural habit with drawing, you'll be doing things like this, where you'll be drawing your leaves with the lines in them. And so when you do your other leaves, you'll be having that effect coming out of them naturally. You'll start to draw in this way. But right now it's okay to just draw and then engineer them, put them back in. What I don't want you to do is this. So let's look at this section here. Don't do this. See, it just broke. Don't put these little T's. Whoops, that really broke. Don't put these little T junctions in there. What you have to do is you have to vary the line weight. You have to move it back into the line so that your line has variety. Okay? So I want you to do this with the next assignment. The other part of the next assignment is to pay attention to contour. So this is not a leaf. That's a cartoon, all right? Leaves don't look like that. Leaves look more like this. Their edges have these really, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes really imperceptible kind of bumps, twists, and turns. And so I want you to look carefully at that contour. Does it go straight? Does it curve? Does it have a little bump? What's happening in the contour itself? Look for that. Look for that wiggliness, that bumpiness. And then you can come in and just kind of look for maybe some more details. And even the veins you'll find on the leaf are going to have changes in them. They're not going to be all the same thickness. They're going to also do the thick to thin. They're going to have different shapes. These are kind of a generic cartoony, whereas real leaves are going to have things like this. Okay, so avoid this kind of generic cartoony leaf, and that often comes from just drawing things quickly. Yeah, if you draw quickly, then you're going to get this kind of effect. When you draw slowly, you're almost naturally going to get this movement in the line. So even if I've got like a plumeria leaf, which is very, very symmetrical and smooth, it's going to have some variations in it. They might not be a lot, and they might only be in a few key places, but I want you to look for something that looks more natural versus something that looks too flat, too graphic.